In this lecture, we will talk about the historical foundations of the counseling profession. By looking to the past, we get a better sense of why it is we practice the way we do today. The counseling profession is relatively new. It's a little more than 100 years old. Around the turn of the century, the late 1800s, early 1900s, is when counseling really started to take shape. Despite these early beginnings, it really was not until the 1950s that counseling as we know it today was formed. It was in the 1950s that organizations came together to create the foundation of the counseling profession. The belief is that if we understand our history and where we've been, it will help us moving forward. It will allow us to not repeat mistakes of the past, and it will also help us to build on past accomplishments as we go forward. So we're going to begin a long, long time ago. Let's start in ancient Greece, and we'll talk about Hippocrates. Hippocrates is often regarded as the father of modern medicine. You may recognize the name as medical doctors and physicians take the Hippocratic oath. It's an oath stating that they will work to help their clients and patients and do them no harm. Hippocrates made many advances that helped medicine become more scientific and more structured. At the time, his belief was that behavioral tendencies, the way we act, and our mental health were related to the balance of four bodily fluids: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm. These are all bodily fluids that we currently possess, and the belief was that the ratio in which you had these fluids determined your personality, your behavior, and your mental health. Extreme amounts of one would cause you to act a certain way. For example, high levels of black bile were associated with psychosis and hysteria. And so early treatment and assessment approaches look to identify what may be your predominant bodily fluid. Fast forwarding some, continuing with our Greek theme, but also into some Roman philosophies. The Greek philosopher Epicurus promoted what he called hedonism. Hedonism was based on the belief that individuals should constantly be trying to promote their mental health by satisfying their needs in the moment. Those that were mentally well and healthy were those that were satisfying their needs, giving in to their current carnal pleasures. The Roman philosopher Epictetus believed in the healing powers of a balanced mind. Epictetus thought that individuals who were able to balance their thoughts, whereas they were not too negative or not overly positive, could self-regulate themselves and overcome any of life's stresses or problems. This view dominated the landscape and eventually led to a new age of treatments, new ways of looking at understanding what it is that causes mental health. Around the times of the Middle Ages, physical and behavioral abnormalities were explained as the result of supernatural forces. Individuals that were acting outside accepted norms for the society were thought to be in league with the devil. In other words, these individuals were possessed or had evil spirits taking over their bodies. The human body then became the ultimate battlefield between good and evil, as individuals tried to do the right thing, yet these evil spirits were causing them to become wayward. Water tests were used to identify those deemed to be in league with the devil. Individuals that were thought to be possessed were tossed in the water. If you were in league with the devil, you would sink to the bottom. This was not the shining moment in mental health history in terms of assessment practices, but it's the best of what they had at that time. It wasn't until much later in the 9th century that early treatment centers began to appear. These treatment centers in no way represent what we consider treatment today, but they did offer an opportunity for individuals to get help, to at least be seen and not just assumed to be possessed. We can then fast forward to the 16th century. So in the 1500s, hospitals called asylums began appearing throughout Europe. Initially, these asylums, however, were not directly seen as treatment facilities. In fact, these early asylums were amusement centers. In the 1500s, individuals who displayed behavioral or mental health issues were locked away in asylums, kept away from the rest of the general public. The belief was that if we could isolate them, they would not be a threat or cause any problems to everyone else. These individuals in the asylums oftentimes were chained to the walls and received very little treatment, either physical or mental. The amusement part came about when the rich, the aristocratic class, the noble class, would tour the hospitals to view those in them. The crazed, mentally deranged, and they would watch them act on their psychoses, and be amused by what they saw. This type of behavior continued in the asylums until the 1700s, when the moral treatment movement started to take shape. Individuals such as William Tukey, Benjamin Rush, and Philip Pinel ushered in the moral treatment across Europe. Pinel was one of the first to implement the moral treatment movement in the asylums. He became an asylum director and came up with the novel approach that if we treat these individuals with respect and dignity, there is a possibility they could get better. Rather than chaining people to walls and neglecting their basic needs, Pinel removed the chains, clothed the individuals, provided them with food and water, and someone to talk to. To the amazement of many, individuals seemed to be progressing. They were getting better. Their behaviors became less severe, and their psychosis less pronounced, to the point that some individuals were actually able to leave the asylum and rejoin society. As this approach spread through Europe, it soon came to the United States as well. In the 1800s, moral treatment movements could be found in many of the U.S. mental asylums. Dorothea Dix is one of the prominent names you see, credited with bringing the moral movement to America. In the 1800s, as the moral movement took shape, counseling was more advice giving or information giving. Whereas today we conceptualize counseling as a collaborative approach with clients, helping them a give and take to address their issues. Back then it was more counselor focused. Clients would come in and ask, how do I handle this issue? What should I do in this circumstance? And the counselor gave the information or gave their advice. This role continued until the Industrial Revolution. One of the offshoots of the Industrial Revolution was the creation of the city-state. Urban centers sprouted up around factories. As more and more individuals fled to these urban areas to work in the factories, populations grew, and a larger number of people were living in a more condensed location. Counselors now had a more visible role as social reformers. This came about on two different fronts. For one, now that there are more people in proximity to one another, there needed to be more work, more help for people in dealing with relationship issues, handling the stress, the trials, the tribulations, and the joys of being in multiple relationships. There also was a need for counselors to help with vocational and guidance concerns. As individuals shifted from working in agrarian farm jobs to now working in factories in the city, their skill sets needed to change as well. The 1800s also saw the rise of psychiatry as a distinct branch of the medical profession. In 1844, a group of asylum directors from around the country got together and formed the Association of Medical Superintendents of American Institutions for the Insane. Despite the moral treatment movement, which was rapidly spreading throughout the country and the world at that time, these asylum directors were initially resistant to science and medical technology. They believed that the treatment approaches provided to individuals housed at the asylums should be focused more on management rather than treatment, containing individuals rather than helping them get better. As society became more informed and technology improved, members of the association called for change. Part of this change was embracing the medical aspect of treating mental illness. Medicine now could treat mental problems as well as it could physical, bodily problems. And so in the 1890s, the organization changed its name to better reflect member feedback. Eventually, this organization would become known as the American Psychiatric Association, and it's still in existence today. In fact, the American Psychiatric Association is the group responsible for publishing the DSM diagnostic manual that we all use as counselors and mental health clinicians. The 1900s also saw counseling and mental health advanced by the works of a lot of important figures. The first is Sigmund Freud. Freud began advancing psychotherapy as a legitimate treatment option in the early 1900s. His approach, psychoanalysis, was outlined in his book Interpretation of Dreams. In it, Freud talked about the unconscious mind and how through a process of free association, the content of an individual's unconscious or subconscious mind could be tapped to understand the motivation behind current behaviors and actions. In addition to psychoanalysis, behaviorism emerged as a dominant theoretical orientation. Here, classical behaviorism, based on the works of Ivan Pavlov, were used to help shape how people respond to different stimuli in their environment. Names that you commonly see associated with this era are Frank Parsons, Jesse Davis, and Clifford Beers. Frank Parsons is widely recognized as the father of guidance. In the early 1900s, 1908, he founded the Boston Vocational Bureau. The Boston Vocational Bureau was a center designed to help individuals prepare for the ever-growing urban, industrial career opportunities that were becoming available. At his center, Parsons developed a three-factor approach to help individuals prepare for careers. His approach stated that counselors needed to acquire knowledge of work. They would then help their clients understand what it is that would be required of them in a work setting. So, for example, if an individual was interested in starting to work on an assembly line, we would inform them what that entails. What does assembly line work look like? What is an average day like for a line worker? How much does a job like this pay? What type of training is required? The second approach was to gain knowledge of self. What does the individual know about themselves? Are they a hard worker? Are they not? Are they introverted, extroverted? By having an idea of who you are, you're better able to make informed decisions about the types of jobs that would work for you. And then, so the third factor was to integrate the two, blending the two together, finding a job that met your needs and played off of your strengths. allowed you to use your natural resources and talents in an effective manner. So while this sounds commonplace now, at the time this was a very innovative procedure. Another individual we see is Jesse Davis. Jesse Davis established the first school guidance programs. Davis worked in Michigan. And his approach, while not what we think of as a school guidance program today, was in its own right very innovative for the time. Davis met with all the English teachers and taught them to teach guidance lessons once per week. So 1 lecture period per week, these English teachers worked on character development, problem-solving skills, things that would make students better people, not just better students. The belief was that by training children to have these skills and develop their character, they would be better suited to function in the changing world around them. Their skills would not become isolated. They would become adaptable, interchangeable, so that as technology advanced and society changed again, they would be able to keep up with the changes and fit in. The story of Clifford Beers is an interesting one. Clifford Beers was a mentally ill man who was hospitalized many times during his life. From early adolescence through late adulthood, he spent many times in a psychiatric hospital. It was during one of these inpatient stays that he wrote a book, A Mind That Found Itself. In that book, he chronicled some of the deplorable conditions that he observed, both in terms of how the mental institutions were staffed, how they were supplied, and how they treated patients. When published, this book became quite popular. Many people read with great interest and were shocked to see at the horrible conditions that existed in these mental institutions. As the public became aware of what was going on, the call for change became louder. And so as a result of Clifford Beers' work, the mental health profession began changing. And the way we treated mental health clients changed as well. So these 3 individuals really set the foundation for moving counseling into the direction that we now know it today. In the decade between 1910 and 1919, we see some other important events that helped shape the counseling profession. In 1911, Harvard University became the first college to offer a training course in vocational guidance. Up until this point, there was no specific training for guidance counselors. You'll note here that it was a single course. It was not a whole curriculum. Whereas today, we have 48, 60, and even 72-hour training programs. Back then, it was a single course. Coinciding with this new training, we also see the establishment of the National Vocational Guidance Association. Now, these individuals who were trained to be counselors could have a professional organization they could join. This organization allowed them to network and share with one another what it was they were doing that was effective and helpful with their clients. In 1915, they published their first trade publication, and it was this publication that eventually became the Journal of Counseling and Development, which today is the flagship journal for the American Counseling Association. There also, during this time period, was an increased interest in assessment and evaluation. As World War I continued, there was an increased need in group testing, being able to accurately place enlisted soldiers in either officer camp or active duty on the front lines. The United States Army during this time contracted with psychologists to help create the Army Alpha and Army Beta tests. The Army and Beta tests were designed to screen those soldiers who were able to participate in officer training school. The Alpha test, which was made up at the time of items from existing intelligence tests, was the written version. It required individuals to be able to read and write in the English language. The Beta test was an equivalent for non-English speaking individuals or individuals who could not read or write. It was more based on pictures. And so here is an example of the Army Beta test. Here you see a series of pictures, and individuals were asked to point out what feature is missing in each of these pictures. For number 1, you see that a mouth is missing. For number 2, you see that eyes are missing. The woman in picture 3 is missing a nose, and so on and so forth. So these were tests that now could be used to classify and categorize individuals. The basis of this work would be used in subsequent years for other types of classification and placement exams. In the 1920s, additional universities began offering courses in vocational guidance. These programs were developed to help war veterans. As individuals are now coming back from active duty and military service, counselors were helping them acclimate back into civilian life, finding careers, dealing with the stresses of military service. This period also saw advances in psychometric properties for many career and counseling-related assessment instruments. As validation procedures became more sophisticated, stronger tests can be used to help individuals. One important test we saw during this time was the Strong Interest Inventory, which was based on Robert Holland's personality codes. Here's an example of what the strong interest inventory looks at. According to the Holland codes, there are 6 different personality types individuals could fall under. Everyone had a dominant personality type, and then you could also have subordinate personality types as well. Based on what your dominant or subordinate personality type was, you would find jobs that matched up with those careers. So for example, under the realistic type, individuals who prefer practical, hands-on, physical activities. This would be better for people who worked in fields such as art or mechanical work. And so matching people up where their jobs and their personalities work really was an offshoot of what Parsons was doing 20 to 30 years earlier. In the 1930s, we see John Brewer emerge on the scene. John Brewer wrote a book called Education as Guidance, and this described a new educational approach. This was the early forerunner of our school guidance programs. Taking some of the ideas that we saw earlier with Jesse Davis, Brewer argued that schools should be employing professionals that could work to meet the personal and mental needs of students, as well as their academic needs. E.G. Williamson came out with his trait and factor theory. The trait and factor theory describes a process where individuals have traits and factors. Traits are the more enduring parts of our personality, how we are the majority of the time. The factors are the more transient, willing to change. Knowledge of the two helped you pick situations or careers that were best suited for you. The rise in new careers and professions dictated that the government published the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. The Dictionary of Occupational Titles describes all of the federally recognized jobs that are available. It's now published by ONET, and it's available online. But you could search through and see all of the different jobs and categories. A brief description of what that job is, a range of salaries that individuals could expect from that job, and what the prospectus is for how that job will look in the future, whether there expects to be a shortage of positions or an abundance of positions. In the 1940s, World War II was going on. Individuals were participating in the war effort, and this created a greater need for individuals to both deal with soldiers going to war, returning from war, dealing with families with grief or loss issues over the death of loved ones. At this time, Carl Rogers began exploring his counseling and psychotherapeutic approaches, which would later become known as the person-centered or client-centered approaches. Carl Rogers deviated from previous treatment approaches and believed that therapy should involve an equal partnership with clients, one that was based on respect and trust. Rogers developed the core conditions of counseling, of empathy, unconditional positive regard, and trust. These, he believed, were the essential characteristics of the counseling relationship. Without these, all else would be meaningless. At this time, we also see the U.S. government getting involved in counseling. Starting with the 1940s, moving on up into the 1950s and 60s, there was a push for the U.S. to grow and become the strongest world power, the most dominant country in terms of economics, military, technology, and careers. And so the government was interested in how counseling can serve as a vehicle for advancing the society and lifestyle they were looking for in America. In 1942, the National Institute of Mental Health was established as a federally run organization designed to gather together the best and brightest scientists and practitioners and create a knowledge base that can be used to help others. In 1946, the National Mental Health Act was passed. This regulated that mental health services needed to be provided for all communities. We'll talk more about the National Mental Health Act in future lectures. In the 1950s, the American Personnel and Guidance Association was formed. By now, we've had 30 plus years of individuals being trained in school guidance and counseling programs. These individuals now were able to form a strong national organization to represent their interests. We see APA develop a new division, counseling psychology, that looks more at the clinical or therapeutic relationship with clients. Previously, APA operated on a more scientific or medical-based model. The National Defense Education Act also involved the need for providing greater mental health services. In the 1950s, the United States was engaged with the Soviet Union in an arms race. The Cold War was beginning. The National Defense Education Act was designed to ensure that our schools were producing individuals who were excelling academically in areas that could benefit the country: science, math, technology, so that we could stay an emerging and rising power. There were also new theories coming about. Prior to the 1950s, your choices as a therapist were limited. Psychoanalysis, trait and factor, E.G. Williamson's approach, Carl Rogers' client-centered approach, and the behavioral approaches were really all that were used in a clinical or therapeutic setting. In the 1950s, we see several new theories: cognitive theories, social learning theory, and developmental theory, which help advance what it is that we as counselors can do with our clients. The 1950s also saw the emergence of psychopharmacology, drugs being used to treat mental illnesses. In 1952, Thorazine was introduced as the world's first antipsychotic drug. And it was widely used to treat schizophrenia with good results. In the late 50s, advances in medicine and science led to new types of medications: MAOIs, monoamine oxidase inhibitors, and tricyclic medications began emerging as effective treatment options. In the 1960s, Librium came out, and this permanently changed the treatment of mental illness. Librium was one of the first new classes of medications that had relatively little side effect. Previously, medications, although they worked, had severe side effects. People became physically ill. They became somewhat catatonic. But now you could be treated and still function in day-to-day living. In the 1960s, we see further advances. Gilbert Wren wrote his seminal work, The Counselor in a Changing World, which described how counselors needed to take a more social advocate type role in helping to make sure that society was providing individuals with opportunities to achieve their dreams and live by their social and individual liberties. The Community Mental Health Center Act, enacted in 1963 by President Kennedy, ensured that mental health centers were available in all communities. 100-mile radiuses were set up, and there had to be an available mental health facility that individuals could use within that range. We also see the Eric Clearinghouse open in 1966. In the 60s, Eric had clearinghouses with different topics or specialty areas. These were government-run clearinghouses that collected current research in those areas. In 1966, the Counseling and Guidance Clearinghouse opened. And so scholars working on counseling or guidance-related issues could submit their work, which could then be accessible to clinicians, students, and researchers nationwide. In addition to these actual activities, several social movements were taking place during the 1960s. Civil rights, women's rights, the Vietnam conflict. Each of these caused their own set of issues that led to an increased need for counselors. As society was changing, counselors were constantly needed to help people adjust to the changes. The 1970s saw counseling settings diversify. The American Mental Health Counselor Association emerged as a division of ACA. AMCA represented the interests of counselors working in a variety of settings: clinics, hospitals, treatment facilities, psychiatric hospitals, private practices, vocational rehabilitation centers. Now counselors were emerging in all sorts of settings, really expanding the reach of what counseling can do. As the need for counselors grew and the number of job opportunities for counselors grew, training programs followed suit. These training programs became more advanced, and entire curriculum were developed to help counselors gain the skills needed to work in these diversified settings. To keep counseling on par with other mental health professions, state licensure laws began in the 1970s. Licensure laws were developed in response to APA's push for licensure laws. In 1976, Virginia became the first state to begin licensing counselors. By creating a licensing process, the profession was ensuring that those acting as a counselor met minimum standards and criteria and had adequate training to do so. As counselors were now in many more settings than before, APGA strengthened and grew. Membership now included many other types of counseling. The 1980s could be described as a period of standardization and expansion. By now, we've reached a point where training and counselor credentialing needed to be uniform. And so we see several organizations come about. In 1981, CACREP emerged. CACREP is the Council for the Accreditation of Counseling and Related Educational Programs. It's a specialized accreditation that accredits counselor training programs only. The purpose of CACREP is to ensure to the public that this training program and graduates of this program have met stringent national standards. While it's not required that all programs achieve CACREP accreditation, it is strongly desired. It's a great marketing tool for students to come to, and it really helps prepare students to do the work of a counselor, more so than schools without accreditation. In 1983, we also had the National Board for Certified Counselors established. NBCC sought out to offer a counselor certification. And in 1984, they issued their first certification in career counseling. Today, individuals can gain their National Certified Counselor endorsement from NBCC, which stipulates that they've met certain academic and professional training standards. In 1985, Chi Sigma Iota was founded. Chi Sigma Iota is the largest counseling professional and academic honor society. Its members meet strict academic requirements. Those that perform at the highest levels in their training program are invited to join. We'll talk more about Chi Sigma Iota later in the semester and the benefits that it affords its members. In the 1980s, we also saw APGA change its name to AACD, the American Association of Counseling and Development. This change was made to better reflect what it was that counselors were doing. Developmental issues became a big part of what counselors do, helping individuals deal with changes in their lives. We also see mental health counseling begin to separate itself. And so as the profession began forming and coming together, there also was splintering between the different factions, mental health and school counseling. To help bring everyone back into the fold, AACD changed its name again in 1992. It became the American Counseling Association, and that's the name it continues with to this date. Development was dropped to better reflect the aspect that counseling occurs in many different settings and covers many different client issues and presenting concerns. Throughout the 90s, new ACA divisions formed. In 91, the American College Counseling Association. In 1996, AGLBIC, the Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual Issues and Counseling. In 1999, the Counselors for Social Justice. The growth of ACA divisions continued. In 2004, the Association for Creativity and Counseling was formed. And just this past spring, in March of 2013, the 20th and newest addition to the ACA division roster was the Association for Child and Adolescent Counseling. During this time, we also see counselors become recognized on most HMO or insurance plans. So now counselors were seen as providers of services that could be reimbursed through third-party payers and insurance programs. This was a big step in the counseling profession because now services were more widely available to a larger population of clients. And as we move forward, some of the current issues that we deal with. Managed care continues to be a big issue. Helping counselors gain access on several other different levels so that clients could seek services and be reimbursed for these services. There's a push right now by the American Counseling Association to work with state and federal legislators to allow counselors to be reimbursed by Medicaid and Medicare for the services they provide. There's also a push to look at how counseling could be expanded given the new technologies. How could technology be used to supplement what's currently being done? And also, how could counseling occur online and via distance, reaching a greater audience? NBCC, in cooperation with the Center for Credentialing Education, now offers a distance certified counselor credential for those who do their counseling work predominantly online. We also saw new focuses on spirituality and wellness, taking a more holistic look at individuals and how the different aspects of their life affect their performance at home, at work, and in their communities. There's a greater emphasis on counselor advocacy. As we deal with professional identity issues and finding out who we are, we need to become more unified in our voice. Counselors need to work to advance the profession so that we will be afforded a lot of the opportunities that other professions that have been around much longer currently enjoy. And so efforts are underway, led by the American Counseling Association, to help educate practitioners, the general public, state, local, and federal government officials on what it is that counselors do and what the valuable services we can offer the community really are. And so hopefully, as we've gone through this brief trip through history, you can see that mental health has made many changes. From being a purely speculative profession way back in ancient Greek times, into now where it's a more standardized, diversified profession, we're able to provide better services to clients. And we've not reached our pinnacle yet. There is still much more that counseling can do, and much more that we can grow in new areas. And so, the takeaway you should get from this lecture is that the counseling profession, while still young, is also still growing. And the steps we've made in the past will be useful in guiding us going forward in the future.